Welcome to the Followup podcast. My name is Hayden. I am the worship director here at Arbor Church, and today I'm joined by Bryan Cobley, our students director, and Ryan Plants, our lead pastor and speaker from Sunday. We did it. We made it through the first series of your reign, your tenure here, Ryan.
That's what I like to refer to it as, my reign.
Long may he reign.
Seems healthy.
Seems
like what Christ would say.
Exactly what I would think.
What are your family words?
Yeah.
Your family words.
Reign.
Bring on the rain.
Fear and dominion. That is his family words. So we finished Summer on the Mount. We got to hear, was this 5 weeks? Or was it 4 weeks?
Well, it's 4 weeks.
Yes, 4 weeks.
of
because of serve day.
We had serve day in between there. But 4 weeks, and we were able to look at Jesus' teaching on being peacemakers, salt and light, our call to lay down our right to retaliate, and most recently, we saw Jesus' call to set aside our judgmental hearts and remove the plank from our eye. So some teachings that I think are really quite familiar to like anyone who's spent any time in the church. Some kind of classic teachings from Jesus.
I love the plank you brought up on stage.
Yeah, that was quite big, wasn't it? yeah. It was not a small plank for an illustration.
Yeah, no, where'd it go?
I don't know where it went, but I knew coming here to Arbor that I would be able to find something that would work. I was like, there's got to be some kind of like spare piece of wood somewhere in the church.
So then you went to the orchard closet and saw we had like 100.
I didn't see that actually.
Yeah.
So I went into the 2 men in a truck room and I found just like 5 or 6 back there, and I was like, see, I knew. And then someone brought it up that. I mean, maybe it was you, Hayden, on Sunday.
I said it,
You were like, there's like an entire like Home Depot like store full of wood.
Yes.
And I was like, see, I knew it. I knew it.
There's no shortage of lumber at this church.
Today's podcast is brought to you by 2 men in a truck.
Yeah.
Do you need help moving?
So what I thought was interesting was you started out this series with peacemaking, right?
Yep.
And I was like, okay, this is like, it was somewhat challenging. It felt like it called out some people. Maybe like some hard work is required. And then every week it just like ramped up. Like I feel like you ended this one, Judgment, and it was like, I don't know if he could call people out more or challenge them more. And it's going to be interesting to see where we go with the next series. But that's what I appreciated was typically you come into being on a part of a church on staff, and it's like, all right, let's just do some softballs. Let's just go easy. Yeah, just light, maybe not challenge people, but you just went each week, stepped it up. I felt like every person I talked to, they're like, yeah, I really felt like this message was for me. I needed to hear this.
Well, and I just hide behind the words of Jesus. Like, hey,
Yes.
he said it, right?
Yes.
Like, not
He
me.
is your refuge.
Yes,
You can hide in him.
Yeah, exactly. But that is
Look, I didn't say it. He did.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yes.
the thing. Is like I kind of run for cover. Like I'm just pointing you to what he said, but they are really challenging. And the sermon is very challenging, and even in the way it's constructed, and it gets to the very end, and it actually even like ramps up a little bit more. And it says essentially Jesus when he's kind of preaching on counting the cost. And there are essentially 2 roads you can travel, and this is long before Robert Frost wrote his poem.
Yeah.
But he's like there's like the wide way and the narrow way, and he kind of like lays it out. He's like, here's what my kingdom looks like. Here's what it looks like to be a citizen of this kingdom, and it's not easy. And it's very like non-attractional in a way, because you're just like, man, it feels like too tall of a task. But thankfully we have God's Spirit to help empower us to walk in that reality.
So I liked your when talking about people that we might be judging in your list. You had you had education was number 1. I think you had appearance.
Yep.
Number 2. Was politics number 3?
Politics was number 3, and the one you skipped, appearance, was actually the last one. Age was one of the first ones. Yeah.
Ages.
Yep.
So I was listening to that, and I mean, I think I talked, the plank and the spec.
Yeah.
I can, every example you gave me, I can give so many like people that I know that I've seen judge people. I'm like, and it was weird because I really looked myself in the mirror because like, have I ever judged somebody on their appearance? Probably.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know if I've ever judged somebody on education, but maybe. Politics, definitely.
Yeah.
Age, no. I think me being a young person is very hard to judge somebody based upon.
Sure. I mean, but have you ever
age.
found yourself in a spot where like you see someone who's like so much older where you're like,
get off the road, you shouldn't be driving.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, now we're veering back into driving talk. That was like 50% of it.
That was
last week.
retaliation.
That was a
yeah.
lot. That was on retaliation. But yeah, or like I mean, yeah, where they'll like voice their opinion and then you'll be like, you don't really quite get it anymore. You're out of touch. You know what I mean?
Okay, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
So I was looking at that. I'm like, man, I can see that in today's world.
Sure.
Like the examples that you gave, do you think the early church, like when Jesus was speaking, kind of felt that same way? I say maybe politics, but
yeah,
I'm
I think
curious of like for them, how would they have heard that? Like, what in their mind, they're like, oh yeah, I am judging.
Yeah,
the person.
Well, I think appearance, like we saw. I don't know if it's really a chicken or the egg situation, but like, why was John the Baptist?
That's a good example.
This person people did not want to be around. Like, was he the way he was that led to him being kind of a schlub, or was he a schlub and that's why people kind of did not hang out with him?
Like John the Baptist was the original like beach bum. He made that look cool.
Yeah.
Well,
so yeah,
and one of the things that we're doing right now as a staff is we're reading this book called Power and Weakness.
I
And
read a couple chapters.
Yeah. You forgot this most recent one, but that's okay, right? There's grace for that. But it's a really challenging book, and one of the things that the writer, his name's Tim Gombis, talks about is Paul's appearance when he would appear in different environments. And clearly, Paul did, in one environment, he was so brutally beaten that he was like almost, disfigured.
Yeah.
Presenting the gospel to those at Derby. And I think that clearly, back then, as people were kind of presenting their rhetoric and their points and trying to persuade people to different ideologies, my guess is that by and large, it was like you wore your nicest toga and you brushed your teeth with whatever they brushed their teeth with back then. I don't know. And then they, put their little kind of like that, like, what do you call it? The garland in their hair,
yeah. Laurel, yeah.
And then they spoke, very eloquently. I do think appearance was a big thing back then.
Well, and then actually, as you were talking, I also thought of one of the arguments against Jesus was, this is Joseph's son, like this carpenter's son. So
economic status was huge.
Yeah.
So so it would have been.
Yeah.
No.
And politics, as we know, would have been massive as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So so hearing that, I'm like, it was just cool to me thinking like early church, like, man, how would they have heard the speck in the log? Was it just clearly? Because the way I used to interpret that, and still do because it hits, is like when a Christian will say, "Man, that person is sinning. Look at them. Look at their sin. Look at their sin," and not seeing
their own thing,
their own sin.
Yes.
But like you expanded that even more, like maybe judging just even outside of Christian principles and values.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As I was going through that list, was there anything else that you thought of that you were like, oh, I wish he would have added that to the list?
Oh, no. I think I would have been judging.
Yeah.
If I put more in that list, I think I would have just been
judging. Yeah. You'd have been like, oh, you've been thinking about that thing and then thinking about.
What I appreciate about the content that you selected on this path is that you still ended with judgment, because I think it's so easy, like Jesus said, to see the speck in someone else's eye, right? We sit through these past 3 weeks of content and we're like, I know exactly who Ryan's talking about. Like, I have that person in my life. And then you end with like, crap. Okay, this is about me.
Yeah.
It's not about like the pointing out like, oh, I know of someone who is a peace killer, or I know someone who's not being salt and light, or I know someone that only retaliates. And so I think like the fact that Jesus ended his sermon the same way that we ended this series, it's like very good awareness of what the human condition will end up doing, is seeing the speck in someone else's eye before we see the log in our own.
And what's so interesting is that when we really just process Matthew 7:1-5, Jesus is saying, essentially, you think you see the speck in their eye, but you actually don't.
No.
Like, you don't. As long as that plank's in your eye, you don't see the speck, because if you truly saw the speck, you would know how to address it. And you would know that the way to address the speck is the same way that I, your heavenly Father, address that plank in your eye, which is with grace and mercy and love, and like kindly walking you through what that repentance looks like. It doesn't mean that there's not like hard decisions that have to be made when we remove that plank. But it also means that the way we think we deal with, the sin in other people's lives it needs to be completely revolutionized. You know, it's not a harsh word.
And I think the tension of that verse is we do need to do the work of, before we hop into fixing someone else's problem, we need to eliminate that from our lives. But also, it's really hard sometimes to know that there's an issue until someone that you love and trust brings it up to you.
Yeah.
But there has to be this balance, right? Because it can't just be, I can't tell anybody anything about themselves until I'm this perfect, sinless person, right? So there's this balance of like, yes, I can't be too critical of Bryan talking over people if I'm also talking over people. It's like, okay, we can both, Bryan, that's just an example. I don't think you talk over people. I think you showed a lot
that
of
example had very
restraint.
Close to home.
Yeah. You showed a lot of restraint there, not talking over me. But for example, like I can't wait till I'm perfect to then address people that I love and care about, because then how are they going to know? And vice versa.
Exactly. And I think we know, Lord willing, we know in our hearts, like when I'm approaching someone about something, it's about the intent. Like, am I there to like berate that person so that they feel other and less than and condemned? Or am I there because it's like, no, like I think Jesus with the woman who was caught in adultery, he wasn't like, yeah, it's cool, go for it. Like keep doing it. You know what I mean? Like, see what I did to those guys? Like, they're out of here now. And so like he says, like, where are they? Well, they're gone. See, there's no one to condemn you. And then he says, go and sin no more.
Yeah.
Like I think it's the loving intent of, no, I don't want to bash you with rocks.
Yeah.
I want to like lovingly usher you out of the thing that's like destroying your soul with rocks.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it also reminds me of the story, and I gotta think, maybe you know this top of your head, of when Jesus shared this, but it's also like that prayer that he brought up. The person who goes and says, God, thank you for not letting me be like the Pharisees and then Pharisee, was it a Pharisee that came up and said, God, I'm a sinner?
I believe so, yeah.
Was it
yeah.
Yeah, so like that same concept. You have one person like, just thank you for not making me
like that.
Like them. I'm great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, one person's like, I'm awful.
And the one person was the broken person.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, reminds me of that. So one thing I brought up at the very end when I came up to do the very difficult task of closing out the sermon also bringing up people who do judge themselves really hard. It was kind of, I don't think the verse said that, but as I was sitting there, I was just thinking of myself, how sometimes I'm my biggest judger. Like I'm very much, I can see my plank and I can't look past my plank. And that's all it is. So do you have, like, can you speak on that? And
well, I think what it comes down to is where do we get our identity or our righteousness from? And if it's this desire to be perfect, right? Like, I mean, because that's what the inner critic is saying. You're not perfect enough yet. You're not perfect enough yet. And if that's what it comes from, then what we're doing with that plank is, instead of like removing it, which I think ultimately is a word picture for repentance, which is ultimately, going before Jesus and being like, this is wrong, help me, God, and like walking a new direction by his power. The inner critic in you, if you're leaning into judgment, you're going to try to remove that yourself, and you can't. No amount of work can remove the guilt and the shame that you feel about that plank, especially when you're aware of it. And so I think really what it would require is just the humility to understand, like, like you might have that inner critic, but no one's perfect. And that is exactly why Jesus came, was to be perfect in our place. And would we throw ourselves at his feet and trust him for our righteousness, and hopefully find some rest in that.
I love the three they kept bringing up was like mercy, grace, and kindness.
Yeah.
Like Jesus give you the mercy, grace, and kindness.
Yeah.
That's what I walked away with. Is like me, who I do feel like I'm my worst like critic.
Sure.
My worst, like I have to remember, like, okay, I am like, I even after closing, like on Sunday, I'm like, that was awful. I didn't help anybody. I'm just gonna go home. And
no, it was great.
Yeah. But even then, I'm like, okay, mercy, grace, and kindness. You just told that to everybody else. Just now.
Yeah, receive that.
Yeah,
and I mean, I think it takes faith. It takes faith to believe that our God views us through love. And his word says over and over, and this isn't just Jesus. I mean, we see this throughout the story of redemption, that like mercy triumphs over judgment. that doesn't mean that like it's we can do whatever we want, but like the way toward transformation and change is like being in a place where you can being in a place that is absent of guilt and shame. And I think that that's the environment that the Holy Spirit fosters, and it affords us the freedom and the space to truly change and transform. Whereas the critic, judgment, condemnation, I believe that so much of that is not only interwoven into kind of our fallen selves, but like that's the enemy, right? Like the enemy speaks that condemning voice.
Last question I have is, does this go against Jesus' teaching that if you see a brother or sister judging and like, pointing out other people's specks, can we say, hey, brother or sister, like, do you not see the plank in your eye? Can we take the position of Jesus, or are we doing exactly what that person is doing, where we're now pointing out their speck and we're missing our own plank, and we get into a cycle of speck pointing and plank
retaliation?
Yeah, like and I'm super wondering, like, so I know I think we can all think of people in our life who are very critical about. Let's just bring up the politic thing again.
Sure.
People who are like, I'm never listening to that artist again, or I'm never watching that actor again because they support the other candidate. And it's like just completely judging that person just upon one little thing.
Sure.
Can we go, hey man, like, do you not realize how hateful that you're being? Like, we're pointing out.
Sure.
But
then the question is, you're getting a little meta here, right? So like that's the person who's judging, and you're the person who's calling it out, and you're saying there's another person saying, hey, you're calling out that. And like, what I would say is like, what's the worst that can happen? Like thank God for that brother or sister who might like point something to you and you'd be like, you know what, I didn't even see that. Like, thank you.
So is the true application, everybody just worry about yourself?
I think like that's if you're working from first principles, that is principle number one. It's what David wrote in Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Like that's where we have to start. And then moving beyond there, though, I do think we do not do our fellow brothers and sisters in Jesus a service if we're never stepping up and saying the hard word, because that loops all the way back to the beginning of our series about being a peacemaker.
Yeah.
Because then we default to just being peacekeepers all the time.
It's hard because it really is like there is people I'd like to point out their plank. And but they can easily look at me like, what about you? Haven't you?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, I'm not trying to attack you here, and now I'm attacked, and now I got to retaliate.
Yeah, and that enters into the blessed art of peacemaking.
We get hit every week. Yep. The start of one.
Yeah. And I love that you use Psalm 51, create me a pure heart. And I thought the other psalm that would have worked really well with this message would be 139, and that's search my heart.
Yes.
Is there any offensive way in me?
Totally.
Lead me back towards your way. So I think like that is, like if that is our morning prayer, create me a pure heart and search my heart, and then I get into the office and Bryan points out something that I do wrong, I'm like, okay, that's God right there.
Yeah.
I asked for it.
I mean, I'm not.
And Bryan, it's God and Bryan.
But that's a great way of looking at it is, if we ever find ourselves on the receiving end of someone pointing something else out in us, would we have that North Star of hey, Psalm 51, Psalm 139, and God's Spirit can sometimes, communicate to our, our hearts that reality. But how much more often, I think in my own life at least, does he communicate through like a friend?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
My spouse, someone.
I do feel like I had somebody ask me recently, like, how do I hear God's words? And I was like, through the people he put in my life that I trust.
Which I mean, like as we wrap up here, like is the value of community, right? Yeah. And just as if you've been watching this podcast now for this long, and we're approaching kind of the end of it, of this particular episode, we're going into a new series called Better Together.
Yes.
And the value of being together as God's people and serving together and growing together and welcoming others together. And that's I think the value of being together is God uses other people in my life to support me, to challenge me, to help me more faithfully follow the way of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, as Ryan said, we're going to have to cut things a little short today. We have behind the curtain reveal. We have the fire department going through the building checking for that we're all up to date and that our fire alarms work. So at any moment,
and we've made
a
it this
fire
far.
alarm could just go off and we end the show.
Yeah.
So we decided let's do a tighter episode this week at 20 minutes. So any closing thoughts, questions, anything like that before we go?
Nope, I don't have any. Just looking forward to seeing everyone this coming Sunday. I hope everyone had a good Labor Day weekend, and looking forward to kind of getting into the fall.
Yes,
yeah,
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for listening or watching the Follow-Up podcast, and we will see you guys next week.